Retired Detective Owen is haunted by one cold case: the disappearance of Della and her 3 kids. With no financial trail and a clean break, the department ruled she ran away to start a new life. But the lack of any goodbye note always bothered him. He'd all but given up when a land surveyor calls about a legal dispute. He's found an unpermitted hidden storm cellar on the edge of the farmstead where Della once lived, its entrance completely overgrown and concealed by a rock garden. This is the kind of discovery that can unravel a 12-year-old mystery, turning a cold case hot in a single afternoon. We're about to follow this retired detective as he chases the only real lead he's ever had. Stick with us to see what secrets were buried in that cellar, and if you find yourself putting the pieces together, share your theories in the comments below. The dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun of Owen's study were the most action he'd seen in years. Retirement was a quiet affair, a collection of days punctuated by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the rustle of newspaper pages. But even in the stillness, one case file always remained on the corner of his desk, its manila folder worn soft at the edges. Della Mae Collins, missing. 12 years. It felt like a lifetime. The official report was tidy: a single mother of 3, a volatile ex-husband, a sudden disappearance from their rented farmhouse in rural Kansas. No note, no emptied bank accounts, no sign of a struggle. The ex, Rick, had a temper, but he also had a rock-solid alibi for the entire week she went missing, clocked in at the factory an hour away, with a dozen co-workers to back him up. So the department had closed the book, labeling it a voluntary disappearance. A mother who simply packed up her kids, 11-year-old Leo, and the 7-year-old twins, Piper and Paige, and vanished into a new life. Owen had never bought it. Della wasn't the type. She was a planner, a list maker. She wouldn't have left her sister without a word, wouldn't have left her son's epilepsy medication behind. The details never sat right, and the case became the one ghost he couldn't shake. The sudden ring of his cell phone was a jarring intrusion. He didn't get many calls these days. He fumbled for the device, squinting at the unknown number. Owen speaking. The voice on the other end was young, hesitant. Mr. Owen? My name is Caleb. I'm a surveyor with county planning. I was told you were the lead detective on an old missing persons case. The Collins family? Owen sat up straighter, his back protesting. I was. What about it? Caleb cleared his throat. Well, sir, I'm out at the old farmstead off Route 7. The bank is finally selling the land, and I'm marking the property lines for the new owners. There's a problem with the original survey, and, well, that's how I found it. Found what, son? Owen asked, his patience thinning. A structure. It's not on any county blueprint, not on the original farm layout. It's a concrete cellar, but the entrance was completely hidden. It's under what looks like an old rock garden, covered in a century of weeds and dirt. The only reason I found it is because my ground-penetrating radar showed a void. It looks like it's been sealed for a very long time. A cellar. Owen's mind raced. The farm had a main cellar attached to the house, which they'd searched top to bottom. This was something else, something hidden. Don't touch anything, Owen said, his voice now carrying the authority of his old job. I'm on my way. He hung up, the quiet of his study suddenly feeling suffocating. For 12 years, he had imagined 1,000 scenarios, but none of them involved a secret hole in the ground. He grabbed his keys and a heavy jacket, his heart pounding with a forgotten rhythm. Hope was a dangerous thing for a retired cop, but for the first time in over a decade, the ghost of Della Collins felt a little less like a memory and a little more like a mission. The drive out to the farmstead was a journey back in time. The same cracked asphalt, the same endless fields of corn stretching to the horizon. The farmhouse itself had been torn down years ago, leaving only a concrete foundation choked with weeds. Caleb, a young man with a sunburned neck and earnest eyes, was waiting for him by his truck. He led Owen to the far edge of the property, near an old, crumbling stone wall that marked the boundary. It's over here, Caleb said, pointing to a mound of overgrown earth and fieldstones. We thought it was just a pile of rocks for decoration, but look. He had cleared away some of the thick vines and thorny bushes, revealing the edge of a flat metal hatch, rusted nearly solid. It was flush with the ground, and without Caleb's equipment, no one would have ever known it was there. It was deliberately concealed. Owen knelt, his knees cracking. He could see now how the large, decorative rocks had been artfully placed around the hatch, making it look like a natural part of the landscape. This wasn't a forgotten cellar. It was a hidden one. "Can we get it open?" Owen asked. Caleb shook his head. "It's padlocked, and the lock is a ball of rust. You'd need bolt cutters, maybe more." Owen pulled out his phone again. He had one favor left to call in. He dialed the number for the current sheriff, a man named Brody, whom Owen had trained as a rookie. "Brody, it's Owen. I need a favor. I'm out at the old Collins farmstead." He explained what the surveyor had found. There was a pause on the other end. "Owen, that case is colder than a Kansas winter. You're retired, remember?" "Humor me," Owen said. "Something about this feels wrong." "It always has." He heard Brody sigh. "All right, I'll send a deputy out with some cutters. But Owen, if it's just an old root cellar full of dusty jars, you owe me a steak dinner." "If it is, I'll buy you the whole cow," Owen promised, but his gut told him he wouldn't be paying for any dinner tonight. While they waited, Owen walked the property line. He remembered interviewing the ex-husband, Rick, in the weeks after the disappearance. Rick had been the picture of a grieving man, cooperative and distraught. He said Della had been talking about leaving, about wanting a fresh start somewhere new after her mother passed away. He'd produced a half-written letter she'd supposedly started, full of vague plans. At the time, with no other evidence, it was enough. Rick's alibi at the factory was airtight. A supervisor and 3 line workers confirmed he never left his shift. But Owen recalled the look in Rick's eyes. Not grief, but something colder. Something possessive. He'd always believed Rick knew more than he let on, but he could never prove it. A sheriff's cruiser finally kicked up dust as it came down the long gravel drive. A young deputy stepped out, bolt cutters in hand. He looked from Owen to the hidden hatch with skepticism, but followed Brody's orders. It took several minutes of straining and snapping, but finally the old lock broke apart. With a groan of rusted metal, the 3 of them heaved the heavy hatch open. The air that rose from the darkness below was stale and musty, thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The deputy shone a powerful flashlight down the steep concrete steps. It wasn't a root cellar. The space below was small, but it was organized. There were 2 simple cots against one wall, blankets neatly folded. Along the other wall were shelves stocked with canned goods, jugs of water, and boxes of crackers. In the corner, a small stack of children's books sat next to a board game. This wasn't a place for storing vegetables. It was a place for hiding. This was where Della and her children had gone. The official theory of her running away to a new life had just been blown to pieces. She hadn't run far at all. She had gone underground, right here on the property, terrified of something or someone. Owen's heart hammered against his ribs. He took the flashlight from the deputy and carefully descended the steps, his shoes crunching on the dusty concrete floor. The air was cold, and the silence was absolute. He ran the beam of light across the small room. He saw a portable camping toilet, a first aid kit, and a box filled with Leo's medication. She would never have left that behind voluntarily. His light landed on one of the cots. Lying on the pillow was a simple spiral-bound notebook. Owen reached for it with a trembling hand. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was holding Della's story. He flipped open the cover. The first page was dated June 4th, 2009, the day after she was officially reported missing. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Day 1, it began. We made it down without him seeing. The kids think it's a camping adventure. If we can just stay hidden for 1 week, Marie is coming for us. 1 week of darkness to get a lifetime of freedom. Owen sat down on the edge of the cot, the weight of 12 years pressing down on him. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a sanctuary she had built to escape a monster. And as he read on, he realized the monster had been closer than anyone ever imagined. He continued to read, page after page. Della's journal was a meticulous and heartbreaking account of a life lived in fear. She detailed how Rick's behavior had escalated after their divorce. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was stalking. He would show up at her work, drive past the house at all hours of the night. He left unsettling gifts on her doorstep: a single dead rose, a photograph of her from high school with the eyes cut out. She had gone to the police twice, but with no direct threats of violence, they told her there was little they could do besides document her complaints. They advised her to get a restraining order, but she wrote in the journal that she was terrified it would only make him angrier, more unpredictable. The idea for the cellar came from an old story her grandfather used to tell about a bootlegger who had a hidden bunker on the properties during Prohibition. She spent months digging it out in secret, telling the kids she was making a bigger garden. She worked at night, hauling dirt out in buckets, buying the concrete mix one bag at a time from different stores so it wouldn't draw attention. She stocked it slowly, buying a few extra cans of food each time she went to the grocery store. It was a desperate, brilliant plan born of sheer terror. Her sister Marie, who lived in Oregon, was her only confidant. The plan was simple. Della and the kids would disappear into the cellar for 7 days. Rick, finding the house empty, would assume she had finally run away. After a week, when he had hopefully given up his initial search, Marie would drive to Kansas, pick them up in the dead of night, and take them back to Oregon to start a new life under a different name. Owen felt a deep, profound sadness for this woman he had never met, a woman whose fear was so palpable it seemed to seep from the pages of her journal. The entries for the next few days were filled with a tense optimism. The kids were getting restless in the confined space, but Della kept their spirits up with stories and games. She wrote about the guilt of lying to her son Leo, telling him it was all a game of hide and seek. She rationed their food and water carefully, counting down the hours until Marie was due to arrive. The 7th day's entry was dated June 10th. It was short, filled with relief. Tonight's the night. Marie called from a payphone in Colorado. She's on her way. By morning, we'll be free. I can't believe we did it. We're finally going to be safe. It was the last neat, hopeful entry in the book. Owen's hands shook as he turned the page. The final entry was written on the same date, June 10th, but the handwriting was a chaotic, terrified scrawl, the pencil digging so hard into the paper it had torn through in places. Truck. I hear a truck. It's him. How could he know? He's walking around up there, kicking at the rocks. He's found us. He's trying to pry the hatch open. The kids are screaming. I told them to hide under the cots. Oh God. He's shouting my name. He knows. He knows he's going to get in. The sentence ended there, a long, jagged pencil line trailing off the page as if her hand had been violently jerked away. Owen stared at the final unfinished word, a cold dread washing over him. He knew what had happened. Rick's alibi hadn't mattered. He hadn't needed to be there when she first disappeared. He just needed to be there on the 7th night. He had found them. The confrontation hadn't happened out in the open. It had happened right here, in this cold, dark tomb. Owen closed the journal, his mind a whirlwind of anger and regret. For 12 years, Rick had lived a free man, playing the part of the abandoned husband, while the truth was buried just a few feet beneath the earth. The entire investigation had been built on a false premise. They were looking for people who had left, not people who were trapped. He climbed the stairs back into the sunlight, the journal clutched in his hand like a sacred text. The young deputy and Caleb looked at him, their faces full of questions. She didn't run, Owen said, his voice raspy. She was hiding, and he found her. Sheriff Brody arrived a few minutes later, drawn by his deputy's urgent call. Owen didn't need to say much. He just handed Brody the journal. As the sheriff read the final, frantic entry, the color drained from his face. My God, he whispered. This changes everything. The farmstead was immediately declared a crime scene. Forensic teams were called in from the state capitol. They combed through every inch of the cellar. They found faint scratch marks on the inside of the metal hatch, confirming Della's final words. They also found something else, something that made the case even darker. Tucked away in a corner, hidden beneath a loose floor tile, was a small, disposable camera. Owen realized Della, in her meticulous planning, had likely bought it to document her new life, to take pictures of her children seeing the Pacific Ocean for the first time. The forensic team carefully developed the film. Most of the pictures were of the kids, their faces pale but smiling in the dim light of the cellar. But the last photo on the roll was a blurry, chaotic image. It was taken from a low angle, as if from the floor, and it showed the cellar steps. On those steps, descending into the darkness, were a pair of dirt-caked work boots. Above them, the photo captured the glint of something metal, a crowbar, gripped in a man's hand. The photo was a silent testament to the last moments of their lives. Now, they had a murder investigation, but their prime suspect had a 12-year head start and an alibi that had held up for over a decade. The alibi, Owen said, sitting in Brody's office the next day, that's the key. It has to be breakable. They pulled the old files. Rick's alibi was centered on his job at a large automotive parts factory. He worked the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. On the night of June 10, 2009, his time card showed he clocked in at 9:58 p.m. and clocked out at 6:01 a.m. His supervisor, a man named Gerald, and his coworkers all signed statements confirming he was there, working his station on the line. But Owen remembered something from his original interview with Gerald. The man had been nervous, his loyalty to his friend Rick obvious. People cover for their buddies, Owen told Brody, especially in a small town. Let's find Gerald. It took them 2 days to track him down. Gerald had retired 5 years ago and was now living in a small fishing cabin a few hours away. When Owen and Brody knocked on his door, the man's face went white. He knew why they were there. At first, he stuck to his story. Rick was there, I saw him. He worked his whole shift. But Owen pressed him, laying out the evidence from the cellar, showing him a copy of the last photo. He described the terror in Della's final journal entry. Gerald's resolve began to crumble. He was a good guy, Rick, he stammered. He was just broken up about the divorce. He wasn't broken up, Gerald. He was a monster, Owen said, his voice low and hard. And you helped him. You lied for him. Finally, Gerald broke. He confessed that Rick had come to him that night, panicked. He told Gerald that Della was threatening to take the kids and he'd never see them again. He asked for a favor, just a few hours. He needed Gerald to clock him in, cover for him on the line, and then he'd be back before the shift was over. Gerald, feeling sorry for his friend, agreed. Rick had returned around 3 a.m., his clothes covered in dirt, his hands blistered. He'd told Gerald that he'd handled it, that Della wouldn't be a problem anymore. Gerald had been scared, but he kept his mouth shut. For 12 years, his lie had protected a killer. With Gerald's confession, Rick's alibi was shattered. The investigation turned into a manhunt. They discovered Rick had quit his job and sold his house just 6 months after the disappearance, telling everyone he couldn't stand the memories and was moving to Texas for a fresh start. He had vanished as completely as Della had. But now, the police had a new warrant for his arrest, and a national alert was issued. Owen knew it was only a matter of time. The search for Rick went on for weeks. They traced his credit card usage to a small town in the Texas Panhandle, where he had worked at a gas station for a few years before moving on. The trail went cold again, then picked up in Arizona. He was living off the grid, paying for everything in cash, using a false name. It was clear he knew they were coming for him. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A clerk at a remote motel in New Mexico recognized Rick's face from a news report. He had checked in 2 days earlier, paying cash for a week. Owen insisted on going with Brody and the U.S. Marshals for the arrest. He needed to see it through to the end. They found Rick in his motel room, a worn-out man in his late 50s, his confident swagger gone, replaced by the haunted look of a man who had been running for 12 years. He didn't resist. When they put him in the back of the car, he looked at Owen, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You," he said. "You never believed me, did you?" "No," Owen replied. "I never did." Rick confessed to everything. He admitted to stalking Della, to finding the cellar by accident one night when he saw her sneaking out to it. He waited. He let her think her plan had worked. On the 7th night, he went to the farm, pried open the hatch, and confronted her. He never told them what happened to the bodies. He claimed he didn't remember, that he blacked out in a rage. But during a search of the land he owned in Texas, investigators found 4 unmarked graves in a desolate stretch of desert. After 12 long years, Della, Leo, Piper, and Paige were finally found. A month later, Owen stood on a quiet hillside in the local cemetery, watching as 4 caskets were lowered into the ground. Della's sister, Marie, stood beside him, her face etched with a grief that was 12 years old, but as raw as if it were yesterday. "Thank you," she whispered to Owen. "You were the only one who kept looking." Owen simply nodded, his throat tight. He wasn't a cop anymore, and he hadn't solved the case alone. But he had listened to that nagging voice in his head, the one that told him the official story was too clean, too simple. He had followed a thread of doubt that led him to a hidden cellar and a final, desperate message. He had given Della her voice back. As the ceremony ended and the small crowd dispersed, Owen stayed behind. He looked at the 4 new headstones, the final resting place for a family that had just wanted to be free. The ghost that had haunted him for 12 years was finally at peace. And in the quiet of the Kansas evening, Owen felt a sense of closure he never thought he'd find in his long, quiet retirement. What do you think is the most terrifying part of Della's story? The physical threat of her ex-husband, or the psychological horror of being trapped and knowing your abuser has found you? It's a chilling question about where true terror lies. If this story made you think, consider sharing it with someone who appreciates a mystery that unravels piece by piece. Thanks for listening.